We're going to get started. I'm going to call the afternoon session of the House Appropriations Committee to order.
You said
We are joined here
relatively.
this afternoon.
All right, take care. See you soon.
We are joined here this afternoon by the Department of Revenue. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide the Secretary an opportunity to introduce himself, his staff that is here, and then we will swear them in and begin our questions. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us. If you could please start by introducing the staff that is here with you today.
Oh, it's on. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go from my right to my left. We have Amy Gill, who's Deputy of Tax Policy. Our Executive Deputy, Allison Morgan. To my left, Adria Zimmerman, who's the Deputy of Administration. And Stephanie Weand, sorry. She's Executive Deputy of the Lottery. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Secretary, if you would, you and all of the testifiers will stand up so we can swear you in, please. Testifiers, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Secretary, if you have an opening statement, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really wouldn't mind just getting into the exchange with most members. It's been productive in the past, and I appreciate the opportunity. A couple of things are worth highlighting for the Department of Revenue over the past year. Having served in the position for several years now, very proud of our team and what they've been able to accomplish. One of the things that's definitely worth highlighting is the property tax and rent rebate program had not been expanded for many years. It was getting to a point where a lot of folks that really needed assistance from the program were no longer be able to take advantage of it. Through the actions of this body and the Senate, along with the governor, some important expansions were made to ensure that folks were getting the benefits from the program that were, I think, always anticipated. One of the challenges was, given the expansion, would we be able to accommodate the administration of it? And as it, the focus and energy we put into it, the success of us implementing against 120,000 new folks, very proud of that. The actual suspension rate that we saw over the past year was a lot lower than the year before, even with the additional numbers. So that was something that, with the leadership of this assembly, we were very proud to be able to implement the expansion that you advanced and prioritized. The dependent care credit is, again, another item that we are very proud in terms of our implementation, concerned about being able to roll out and provide that benefit over a year process for 220,000 people, and we were very proud of the ability of our systems to accommodate that change. Part of this is the fact that we are very fortunate to have been able to transition to a whole new tax compliance system that integrates all our taxes into one system. It has provided us the ability to promote a lot more efficiencies in the use of personnel relative to tax compliance, because electronic filing is just the way things have gone. More than 90% of all the filings we do on the personal end are through that process. Our collections continue to hit records at $950 million. Our voluntary disclosure program that folks can come in and try to expand our tax base is over $104 million now and is hitting records again. And the taxpayer advocate is another thing worth noting. Every year they take on more cases than they did the year before. And it was a legislatively created office that the legislature charged the Department of Revenue to come forward and have a facet of the department would directly serve taxpayers' needs, and that has continued to perform. So I'm very proud of what our team has been able to accomplish over the past year and look forward to our exchange today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. We're going to start with Representative Kincaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. I want to start with the department held several PTRR events across Allegheny County last year. and didn't involve any Allegheny County members in those events, even if it was in their own district. And my office reached out to the department this year to ask if that was going to happen again and if we would be involved in the planning of that. And we were told that it would be announced in a press release. I requested that the department actually involve us ahead of time and that we not be informed in a press release, and received no response. So is the department planning to hold these events in Allegheny County? Are you planning to involve members before these are officially announced? And how are you going to address the issues with communication between members and your department?
You heard this issue from other members as representative. The answer to the question is yes and yes. Given one of the, I think, successes of the expansion was the ability, like every legislative office does, to do as much amount of interaction with new applicants as possible, 120,000 new applicants. But that partnership that you're reinforcing with us in regards to Department of Revenue and legislative offices working together on these events is something that I believe absolutely should happen. And if there's any deficiencies there, I look forward to working with you to make sure that we can correct it.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the governor's proposal for cannabis legalization. And I wanted to ask, from what I can tell, there isn't any specific information about licensing specifically for social equity applicants for the rollout. There's no designated licenses available for folks who come from disproportionately impacted communities. When it comes to the war on drugs, no focus on small businesses or minority-owned businesses. And I'm wondering if I missed something or if that is actually included.
If we're referring to the same thing, I think it has been accommodated, at least in terms of the proposal that's out there. You're referring to licensing of these. Mm-hmm. The proposal that the governor has before us is a $1,000 license fee, a $1,000 application fee, and annual renewal of $1,000. It's part of the license structure. So if there's any deficiencies there as far as what you're experiencing, interested in working to make sure that what you're talking about is accommodated.
Yeah, I would just point out that there's nothing that's actually designated for those folks or no category created to ensure that those folks are actually prioritized, as most other states have done, to ensure that disproportionately impacted communities are kind of prioritized in the ability to get licensing for various aspects.
I'm sorry, we'll make sure we confirm that with you.
Okay, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the $25 million fee for permits for existing operators to be able to transition from medical to be able to sell adult use, and how that number was reached?
It is a part of the governor's proposal. It's something that is believed by the team, along with the governor, that has developed this, that it's given the fact that we're talking about a whole new industry segment, that a $25 million license fee for a dispensary, especially if they're also in the medical marijuana platform, it would be a reasonable amount. Now, that's something, of course, we'll have to work through, but at this point in time, it was set based on the fact what we would, given the possible business that could come in to a dispensary and what we've seen in other states in terms of volume, it would be a reasonable amount.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity, is that per dispensary or is that per permit? I know that you can have multiple dispensaries under permit. So are we looking at potential at 25 million per permit, or is it potentially like 450 million if you have multiple dispensaries under a permit?
It's assumed to have 22 medical marijuana dispensaries, so about 500 million.
Okay, thank you. And then the 20% tax rate, how did we get to that in sort of looking at other states and what's been effective? I know that there's sort of a sweet spot of tax rate before the illicit market actually ends up being cheaper? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Researching the experience in other states and those who have been in the marketplace for longer than we have, believe that the 20% tax on wholesale, it's not a retail platform, but on wholesale, and 6% on sales was a reasonable amount that we could do, given our marketplace, and still have an industry that starts, that ramps up, and that thrives. That's, at this point in time, that's what we believe is reasonable.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Mako.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary and panel, for being here. My first question for you, sir, is during the governor's budget address, he said that he directed the budget secretary to conduct a comprehensive review of every program we offer in our Commonwealth to identify inefficiencies, costs that can be eliminated. He dubbed it remap. Sunsetting programs that were duplicative and do not work. Were you at all in this process? And if so, did you identify any inefficiencies?
At this point in time, the Budget Secretary's initiative is a pilot. He identified 3 agencies to start, corrections, community and economic development, there's one other one. We probably wouldn't be the logical place to start there because revenue doesn't run many programs other than tax expenditures that are tax credits, other than programs to the lottery. But as part of an initial pilot, choice of revenue probably wouldn't be the best place to go to make sure that you're doing a pilot that would allow you to get the information to expand it statewide.
Gotcha.
We wouldn't be an agency that would allow the secretary to gain much information in that regard.
I mean, from your point of view, can you see, and I guess I'm asking to look into other agencies, could you see potential inefficiencies that we could work together with the legislature? Is there anything that you have identified so far that we could help with?
My responsibility is to run the Department of Revenue, constantly looking at efficiencies in collections and in our administration of the things that we administer. The fact that we have a $40 billion budget across many agencies, to say that up and down review of these programs wouldn't allow us to provide some efficiencies, that wouldn't be appropriate. So I think that process that the Budget Secretary is going through, an up and down review, making sure that programs are running efficiently, are tied to mission, is a responsible process to try to promote efficiency. So I guess the answer to the question is, I do believe it will be worthwhile to advance this.
All right. And then my second question, you briefly alluded to it earlier, the property tax rent rebate or relief fund. The governor said he's going to provide over $1 billion in property tax relief to homeowners. We know that comes from the lottery. And can you explain the process of how this amount is distributed and how it's certified, so we know that these funds can go out to the homeowners and renters?
Well, the $1 billion, which would be the first time it's been at $1 billion, which is, and a plus or minus in relation to the lottery, comes out of the gaming fund, comes out of the facility-based gaming fund. And it's distributed locally to school districts based on a formula of equity, and it's provided against homesteads in terms of exemptions against existing valuations. And each district is different based on relative wealth, and each district gets a different amount based on that, and it's distributed through school districts to a lower assessment. Lottery.
Yeah, I misspoke on that.
Yeah.
Misspoke. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's something we administer as well. We work with the Gaming Control Board on administering this. Lottery fund specifically has traditionally been a place where we've looked to entirely to fund the property tax and rent rebate program. That is transitioning from funds to from the gaming fund. And the only reason I bring that up is it just shows what we need to do proactively to expand the lottery's position in the gaming market. The fact that traditional slots gaming, table gaming in facilities is growing at the pace it is to allow them to accommodate the obligations we've had over the last 50 years, and the lottery is not in a position to do that, is a function of the fact that the market is so saturated. We're the largest state in the nation in terms of total gross gaming receipts, that we have to be working together to see how we can reposition the lottery to increase its activity and its profits so that it can be a viable part of the gaming portfolio going forward.
All right. Yeah, I don't have a follow-up question on that. I think you did a pretty good job of explaining it, given my misstep. So with that, I'm done. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
gentlemen. Representative Young?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to the House. We appreciate your presence here and your testimony. We appreciate all the information that you're sharing, Mr. Secretary and his team. The expansion of the Child and Dependent Care Enhancement Tax Credit provides significant support to the working families across this entire Commonwealth. Can you share any data that indicates the success of this tax credit so far?
The best data is the total amount of taxpayers that received the benefit of it. It's the number is around 220,000 filers have received benefits through this program at different levels. The credit is now, per the good work of this chamber and the Assembly and the governor, is now 100% of the federal credit, which provides for a credit of $2,100 for 2 children, $1,050 for 1. And the numbers that are receiving it is in excess of $200,000. I was very proud of the fact that the Department of Revenue, in an entirely new program, and our tax system does not accommodate these things. It has not accommodated a credit of this breadth in the past, was able to implement that in one filing season.
I appreciate the answer and thank you. We look forward to continuing the good work.
Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Flood?
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Secretary Brown and staff. Thanks for being here today. And I had the pleasure of being with you a few weeks ago when when someone in our area had won a $7 million lottery ticket, and we were able to celebrate that, which was
a good day.
It was a great day, yes, especially for the family. Yeah. But that brings me to my questions, which is regarding the state lottery fund and ticket sales. Through December 31st, the lottery comparative statement shows lottery game sales are down $252.8 million, or 9.9%, in comparison to December 2023. Traditional game ticket sales are down $240.1 million, or 9.7%, through December, as were iLottery sales, which were down $12.8 million, or 18.2%. Looking deeper into the traditional game sales data, scratch-off sales are down 3.9%, as our draw game sales and monitor game sales and fast play sales are slightly up by 2.7%. Scratch-off games are the largest seller and historically represent more than 70% of all traditional game ticket sales. Through December, scratch-off sales are down $61.2 million, representing only 66.95% of traditional game sales. Can you explain this downward trend for scratch-off games through December? Do you see a trend coming?
Defer this to Stephanie, heads our lottery. Good, thank you.
Yeah, sales and profits are down compared to last fiscal year for the lottery. And as you noted, scratch-off sales, this will actually be, it's rather unprecedented. This will be the 4th year where we've had scratch-off sales down compared to the prior year. Scratch-off sales are rather soft in the lottery industry right now across the U.S., but the decline is more significant here in Pennsylvania. And we believe that that has a lot to do with, as the Secretary mentioned, the saturated gaming market and how competitive this market is. Players have a lot of choices where to spend their gambling dollars. So we do believe that has a lot to do with it. We've only had one multi-state jackpot over $1 billion this fiscal year. That happened, it was Mega Millions at the end of December, where in years past, we've had multiple big jackpots. So, you know, the multi-state jackpots, it's sort of like the rising tide lifts all ships. It's you know, helps out across the board. We are tracking to estimate, but it is a decline versus last year.
Okay. You just mentioned about the diverse amount of games available, lottery games. Can you describe to this committee the different types of games offered by the lottery, why some are more successful than others, and how the lottery continues its effort to provide a diversified portfolio of games?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we have a wide portfolio of games that appeal to different players. So our biggest category historically has been scratch-offs. We have many different price points and different styles and themes of games that have the broadest appeal. We also have a portfolio of draw games. Some are multi-state, some are in-state. We also have monitor games like Keno and Express Virtual Sports. We also have Fast Play, which is sort of like a scratch-off that you don't have to scratch. It prints out from the terminal. So we do offer, and we also have online games. We have what are called internet instant games that we sell online, and we sell most of our draw games online as well. So we do offer a breadth of games because different games appeal to different people. So we want to make sure we have a little something for everyone.
Do you feel that the lottery fund is well positioned to continue to grow in order to support the future needs of the aging population and the programs that the lottery fund supports? Those are very crucial funds, and I know that is very important to the seniors back home in my district that rely on their senior centers and the different benefits that they get from the lottery. And it's concerning when you were talking that. And when we think about the sales being down, how are we going to continue to support those programs?
Our current financial position of the lottery is solid. If you look across the projections, we're still projecting a positive balance in the lottery fund. But that has required some use of the other gaming activity, receipts from that in order to accommodate traditional lottery programs. The gaming fund is now being utilized to accommodate all of the receipts that are needed to provide for the property tax and rent rebate program, which is the first time ever that's happened. And the only reason that's the case, as Stephanie had mentioned, is we have a market problem we have to deal with. And the market problem is only related to the fact that notwithstanding the hard work of Stephanie and her team to keep the lottery relevant, that we're competing in the most competitive gaming state in the nation. And there are certain things that this assembly can do to help with the lottery to make it more competitive, which I believe is very compelling because in the end of the day, if other gaming platforms do not have to do the same thing the lottery does in relation to profit margins and other requirements, it's just going to be really hard to compete. So that's right now, as of today, accommodating the important programs in the lottery fund. With the help of the gaming fund, the lottery fund is currently positioned in a positive balance, but the long term is not going to be, we're not going to be able to sustain that without help from the assembly.
Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Malagari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for the little delay there. Secretary, thank you for being here again. Really do appreciate your expertise that you bring each and every year. I have a question with regard to corporate net income tax. We've been starting out a process of lowering that over the past couple years now, and we're on that way. So in addition to the previously mentioned tax proposals, the 2025-26 budget proposes to accelerate the step down of the corporate net income tax, as we know, and eliminate the Delaware loophole. So what's more, this budget proposal includes the elimination of several financial institutions' taxes and subjecting those institutions to the corporate net income tax. Can you discuss how such a proposal would benefit businesses in this Commonwealth? And I have a follow-up question to that as well.
Starting with the step down, probably our biggest liability we've had, at least in terms of tax structure, for a very long time. And the Assembly deserves a lot of credit for this, because it was not something that saw any progress for 2 decades and more, was the reduction of the C&I rate from 9.99 to 4.99. Quicker we get that, the better we are. We'll be in the top 10 of states in terms of the effective rate the businesses are paying here if they're paying the corporate net income tax. And this was a state that was last or second last for a long time. And that really is a major benefit for us. In addition to the changes made by this Assembly on the net operating loss carry forward, allowing for 80% of net taxable income to be offset, another strong piece. The other piece, I believe, at least in my opinion, is a function of the evolution of how markets are, how businesses operate, and taxation. For years, the last 30 years, we've been moving away from the definition of physical presence being physical location, because we didn't want to discourage businesses locating here by taxing them more. It made a lot of common sense. So it's all based on your access to the marketplace, how much you're realizing from the marketplace. And businesses don't operate in separate company silos. They operate as consolidated groups. They send all their cash flow up to the parent company, distribute it to owners. They report on a consolidated basis. Having a tax structure that accommodates how businesses operate is just, in my mind, evolution over time of the way our tax structure needs to be to match a modern economy. And that is the prime reason why the combined reporting, consolidated reporting, makes a lot of sense, notwithstanding the fact that it's been part of the federal system for decades. It'll put us in total in a position that we're a lot more competitive. On the bank financial services side, taxing companies, any companies, based on bank equity and not on cash flow is something that's really antiquated and needs to change. It's something that we got out of on the corporate net income tax side when we started to phase out the capital stock and franchise tax 15 years. It took us 15 years to do it, but a long time ago, 30 years ago, and we needed to do it in the banking sector. And now that the rate is going to come down to 4.99, what banks are paying on the bank shares tax compared to the C&I, it'll be actually a more competitive levy for them. And it'll put all these businesses on equal footing. Also, for those, as we know, for banks that will be paying, and there's many in the fiscal forecast will be paying less, that's just more money available for a bank to lend out in the communities. So it's a strong proposal, and a proposal I believe is a long time coming that we should really take seriously.
And I have a follow-up question on that. So you mentioned the 4.99 percentage that we're actually going to hit 2 years earlier than our projected timeline. How is that making us more competitive now in the business climate? Are you seeing more businesses want to come into Pennsylvania because of that more aggressive, we'll say, timeline in the corporate net income tax reduction?
That is an absolutely very important question for us to answer, because in the end, what we are doing this for, we're doing it for anything, is to encourage more activity, more economic activity in the state. It'll take some time for us to be able to develop the data and the modeling in order to do that. It's early to do that. But one thing we would plan to do in order to defend that proposal as it plays out is to develop the data set that's necessary in order to make sure that it's actually producing what we wanted to produce. At this point in time, we don't have that available, but it's part of our plan in the future.
Thank you, Secretary. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Brown, for answering some questions for us today. So I'm going to look at revenue projections as they stand currently. So if you look at the general fund revenues, they're about $148 million below estimate through the first 7 months. But your revenue projections are suggesting that it's going to be around $37 million at year end, implying that we're going to make up about we'll call it $111 million between now and the end of the year, fiscal year. Where do you expect these revenues to come from, and given the recent shortfalls?
at least in terms of benchmarking against performance, standards for performance and revenue estimating, plus or minus 2% against an estimate is what anybody who relies on that for purposes of appropriating should expect. Right now, our revenue estimating is trending a lot below 1% in terms of accuracy. It's about expectations. What should be the expectations regarding our performance against our estimate? And as of right now, we are in the scope of revenue estimating in terms of performance right on target. I would never say that millions of dollars isn't significant, because it is, but in relation to accuracy of a revenue estimate, we are well in range of the standards and the standards that are out there that define accuracy.
So do you expect over the next couple of months for revenues to pick up over the next 6 months? Because I mean, the last couple months we've been kind of operating at a little bit of a loss. So do you have any concerns that's
Again, it's a relatively very small loss. $37 million was our adjustment. We're tracking very closely, at least in the current cycle and on percentage basis, every one of these cycles against the other body that does this work, and that's the IFO. Again, I would never say the $600 million variance against any other estimate is a small number, because millions of dollars is not small. But in the scope of a $47 billion number, when you're estimating against that revenue base, anything that's plus or minus 2% against that estimate is a very accurate estimate.
Yeah. Okay. Just so to be clear, you do think we're going to hit that pretty close to that $37 million below estimate.
As of right now, that's what we're projecting. Yeah.
Okay. Let's look on the out years a little bit here. Your revenue projections assume about a 2% annual growth over the next year. IFO is about a 2.1%, creating about a $4.5 billion difference for the general fund. How confident are you in these projections over the next couple of years?
As you go out in any forecasting, and this applies to any kind of forecasting, whether it's revenue estimating or business valuation, there are discounts that are assumed regarding accuracy as you go out. But as of this point in time, we are tracking the IFO within those ranges of performance. Every year, we're tracking them 1.5%, 1% differences amongst those different years. This year being $600 million, a little higher in subsequent years, but every single year, I would not be concerned on these, especially 5 years out. To be 1% off of any benchmark 5 years out is really extraordinary, because usually numbers that far out are discounted as much as 40% in terms of their accuracy. So the way to look at this, and we're getting to this place more so every year, that we probably weren't there when I started in service out here when the budget was $13 billion, is we have to, in terms of, I really believe we have to look at this in terms of percentages of variances, because the accuracy can't be determined on nominal dollars. It has to, because the scale of it is too big. So being 1% off of estimate any cycle in terms of the standards for revenue estimating and accuracy is a pretty solid place to be.
So the IFO's raised some concerns. They've highlighted some things that could come up, like maybe the expiring tax cuts at the federal level, or some federal spending cuts. Do you have any thoughts on that and how that may affect revenues?
Right now, we're accommodating in our estimates 3% growth in the current cycle, not considering proposals. Include the proposal that the governor has advanced as part of his proposal at 5% total. All the growth rates that we're assume the things that we know to be probable at this time. And that's you can't accommodate things in the revenue estimate that at a minimum we don't consider probable. But if anything is in these estimates that are in changes in Washington or otherwise that we're pretty certain are going to happen, they're going to be in here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the gentleman, Representative Flemings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. I want to hone in on something that my colleague from the Lehigh Valley brought up earlier about the decline in lottery revenues and sort of what we do about that. I mean, while it's true that every form of gaming contributes to revenue, I think we can all agree and support the fact that lottery revenue is expressly benefits older Pennsylvanians, as we've heard for 5 decades now here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that's something that we can all support. So my question is, given the landscape of, falling revenues in that space, are there tools that we can give the lottery to, maybe help enhance, because it has such an important mission of the funds that are raised going to help older Pennsylvanians?
I'll let Stephanie, our expert at this, weigh in as well. The one thing that is really important in regards to our traditional gaming is the profit margin relief. We were depending, the market says this to us, we're depending on higher value, higher payout games, and their margins are a lot lower than 20%, the mandated margin.
Right.
But the volume of those games is so high that it'll make up the difference. That's a very important initiative.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, as you pointed out, the lottery, we're the only gaming entity in which 100% of the profits, go to the state and support senior programs, and very proud of that over the years. But we do need some help. We need some help from the legislature, and there are a couple things in the governor's budget proposal that would help the lottery and funding for senior programs. The first thing, to tax and regulate games of skill. How it would help the lottery would be limiting the number of machines to 5. He proposed 5 per location, and putting some of that money into the lottery fund to kind of backfill there. And we would go a step further and ask the legislature to consider requiring the games of skill locations to be licensed lottery retailers, just like the VGT locations and casinos are required by law to be lottery retailers. That would be a tremendous help to the lottery to help expand our points of distribution, our retail locations, and level the playing field. And then the other thing, as the Secretary mentioned, eliminating the profit margin mandate. It would give the lottery the flexibility that we need to increase prize payouts so that we can offer games that are more competitive, that players will enjoy. And ultimately, that's to increase sales and profits. The relief up until this point, while we greatly appreciate that at the lottery, it's only been temporary. So like right now, it's set to expire again in 2029. It could go back up to 25%. And if that were to happen, the lottery would have to take some drastic measures to get back up from where we are now, which is around 21%, to get back up to 25%. And I would just add that most lotteries in the U.S. don't have a profit margin requirement. In Pennsylvania, we're one of only 7 in the U.S. to have that. So the 41 other lotteries operating in the U.S. don't have a profit margin mandate. The mandate really is to just maximize sales and profits and not force it toward a certain percentage, but just to maximize profit dollars.
And that profit percentage per capita in states that don't have the margin are higher than ours. Every state on a per capita basis, their profit margins, their total profits per capita are higher than ours. Really, I think, just a very important thing for this assembly to consider.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And that was just, I think your comment was going to lead me to, okay, if we don't have this mandate, how can we be assured that you will hit that number? But you say the data is there in other states where they're actually doing better without a mandate.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Krupa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary and staff. I do want to follow up on one of Representative Ecker's line of questioning. Just for clarification, am I correct then in understanding that neither you nor the governor are anticipating an upcoming recession or downturn in the economy which would result in significant unanticipated revenue shortfalls?
Right now, our projections anticipate GDP growth that's positive. 2.5%, 2% range, and that reflects in our forecasting regarding revenue growth over the next several cycles, ranging between 2.5 and 3.1%. So we're not expecting a recessionary period where those numbers would go down.
Thank you. Switching gears now, and I'm going to set aside the moral discussion on the hazards of legalizing marijuana because this is a budget hearing, so let's talk about budget-related issues with that. Marijuana use, we all know, can harm learning, thinking, and memory development. The use of the drug has been linked to mental health issues, including psychosis and other physical health problems. Other states that have legalized marijuana have seen a rise in traffic fatalities and hospitalizations associated with that marijuana use. There's a rise in substance abuse related to mortality. Homelessness is on the rise. High school dropouts are on the rise. Increased crime in those states. What consideration does your department give for the costs, those social economic costs, they're real costs? Some studies have indicated in Colorado for every dollar of revenue that's been generated by legalizing marijuana, it has actually cost the Colorado citizens $4.50. I've seen one article put that at least as high as $10. But for devil's advocate, if it were to cost our citizens in Pennsylvania $4.50 for every dollar that's generated in revenue, what consideration is your department giving that in our current budget proposals?
We'd have to defer on the investment of the revenue to good people here in the Senate and the budget secretary in terms of how the money that's coming from it is spent. What I would expect is the level of receipts that come into our revenue capacity 25-26 is $563 million, and projection going out are higher. The license fees are the primary number in 25-26, but if there is considerations for other investments of these dollars to accommodate other things, there's a pool of dollars available at $563 million that those conversations could happen in the Assembly to accommodate.
So if there is an increase in things such as law enforcement or DHS or healthcare, what does that do in our projected budgets in our outgoing years?
I can't speak to the spending of dollars. That, with all due respect, Representative, I have to defer that to the Budget Secretary.
Thank you, I appreciate that. With respect to workforce shortages across the state, in every industry that I talk to, whether it's a manager at Dollar General, whether it's a school board member, whether it is someone in the medical profession, there's a workforce shortage. Has there been any consideration given to what legalizing marijuana would do to the workforce and how that would in turn then impact the amount of revenue that's generated?
The current revenue estimates accommodate a certain tax rate on a projected amount of activity and license fees for the businesses within the sector that operate for different categories of operations: grower, processor, dispensary, micro business, for a total of 504 total business entities within this segment. Any other considerations regarding what would need to be spent of these dollars to accommodate other things would have to be done as part of the budget process.
Okay, so, and I'm not asking at this point in terms of expenditures, I'm talking about tax revenue generated. Has there been any consideration at all that legalizing marijuana may have a negative impact on our workforce and therefore decrease the amount of revenue we're bringing in from that particular tax pool?
The revenue estimating that is done and the platforms that we do revenue estimating in this Commonwealth, and it's been this way for a long time, are done on a static basis. They're not done on what would be a more dynamic basis, because you can take a lot of considerations into play in a dynamic model, and they're very difficult to provide a revenue forecast based on a dynamic approach because of all the elements and all the variables. So in order to be as conservative and accurate as possible, what we do is we do estimates on a static basis based on the activity that we know is going to happen, that it's probable. And this modeling right now is based on that platform, and it is a platform that's applied across every other program we have.
And I thank you, and I appreciate the position you're in and the data that you have to analyze. I just think, and more of a comment than a question, that it's certainly reckless to talk about investing this kind of money in a program such as legalizing marijuana without knowing or investigating the actual cost to society. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Brown. Thanks for coming here today to talk to us. This is another question sort of about the interrelatedness of a tax on skill games and some of our other revenue sources. The budget has a 52% tax on skill games, provides needed revenue. We're looking at least the material we've seen says $8 billion over 5 years. We were unable to move this in the past year. I'm wondering if anyone can quantify the cost or describe the costs of failing to move forward on this in terms of the cost or lost revenue to the lottery or to our gaming revenue. Has there been any review on that?
Well, one of the important things that is included in this proposal, Representative, is an accommodation for the lottery. One of the things we've been discussing is the fact that lottery activity, lottery receipts have declined as a result of expansion of skill games within our communities, particularly within facilities that have lottery as part of their offerings to their customers. There's 12,000 of those. So the tax that is going to be proposed to be assessed on skill games at 52%, 5% of it will be deposited in the lottery fund. The total estimates of lost sales of lottery during the past has been $200 million, profits on that around $40 million. The proposal estimates that we will be depositing $38.5 million into the lottery fund 25-26 to accommodate that loss.
And I don't know if there's been any review on the potential loss in gaming revenue, and if your department has anything on that and they can send it, I'd appreciate it. Two of the things that were mentioned were if we were to move forward on some type of skill game tax licensing and a limit on machines. Has there been any consideration about having a buffer zone with any of our gaming institutions? And how that might affect
I don't know if that...
I mean, there's a concern about cannibalization of revenue that, coming into our gaming institutions. Has there been any consideration of that?
As part of the proposal, I can't speak to that specific part of the proposal right now, Representative, but I'd be happy to get back to you if the current proposal has considerations there.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Brown, for being with us. I'd like to follow up on the good lady's discussion about adult use marijuana, because you alluded to the fact that the $500 million in permits would apply to 22 dispensaries, and that seems to equate to $36 million being generated for the state.
I have, in our projections, we have 267 dispensaries.
Oh, 267, okay.
Going to 380 in 26, 27, 493, 27, 28, going up to 606 by 29, 30.
Okay, that's my error then.
I'm not sure we misspoke there, but that's...
There were 22 medical marijuana dispensaries. I think that was the 22 figure.
Okay, all right.
And they would have to pay that $25 million fee.
So that's what I heard then, the 22 million medical dispensaries. So that would equate to about $36 million in revenues.
It's 22 if they decide to be in the recreational marijuana.
Correct,
platform.
correct. So having said that, how much recreational marijuana do you think your staff anticipates would be consumed if if those dispensaries agree to move forward?
You're talking about the total projected 267 to 606?
Yes.
We'd be happy to back in. The tax is a 20% wholesale tax, so we can back into that number to get you what, I don't think we have it on us right now, what the actual gross volume is at a 20% wholesale tax to get there, but we'd be happy to get back to you on that.
I would appreciate that. And again, on this same subject with the legalization of cannabis, beginning January 1st, 2026, That includes implementing a 20% wholesale tax on products that are sold through a regulated framework. And once legalized, that would then subject the sales to the final, or the tax to the final consumer. Given that the Department of Agriculture will be the one to oversee this effort, what discussions have you had with the Secretary of Agriculture as it relates to the implementation and interaction between the two departments?
Well, we have relative roles in relation to implementation. Our role is similar to our role in other types of platforms like this. Is working off of the medical marijuana platform. Is to put together a system on this new platform that would collect the taxes that are part of their proposal. So we would work with the Department of Agriculture to identify the different businesses, different dispensaries, and one thing that's an advantage is that we can use the current platform to do that. We're not starting from square one. We have a medical marijuana platform that we do have a tax system that's applied to that. Just expand it to include the dispensaries that are in the recreational marijuana system. So it's going to be our responsibility to work with them on the tax collection side.
So having said that, you do think there's enough time to fully implement a fully functioning program prior to the commencement date of January 1st, 2026?
We're going to make every effort, Representative, to make sure that's the case, yes.
So when would legislation need to be enacted to allow your department to be able to effectively and efficiently administer the new tax laws surrounding the new tax?
Well, the proposal is, we're making the proposal now. It's part of the budget. Our financial projections are part of the budget. So anytime within this budget cycle, as the budget's being worked on, would be something we would expect. We're not anticipating that it would happen outside the budget cycle. It would happen along with the conversation about the budget. But any time within that time frame would allow us to move forward to do what we need to do.
So is there draft language currently available that we could preview related to the potential legislation that you're talking about?
Working with the front office, the final product, when it's complete, will make sure that the members of the Assembly have it.
We would appreciate that. Just one other question. In the November 2023 publication, the Congressional Research Service stated that, quote, due to the legal risks under federal law, many financial institutions are unwilling to provide common banking products and services, such as debtor credit payment services, business loans, electronic payroll services, or checking accounts to state-authorized marijuana businesses. Is this a concern for you?
We've been able to work with the current platform as it relates to financial transactions with the medical marijuana system, and we've been able to implement that, and it's worked successfully. Obviously, having the ability to work with the other types of payment systems would be a benefit to us, but one thing I can say that the limits that have been placed on us because of the nature of the product, we've been able to work through and make sure that at least the system that's legal right now is working.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Siegel.
Secretary Brown, apologies. I was took an important call, so. My first question, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself or repeating something brought up by a previous member. I was out. As we know, it's no secret the Commonwealth is in need of additional revenue as we try to, balance the budget. And over the years, I think one of the questions has been, how do we modernize our tax code to reflect emerging industries, new trends, and I think properly capture revenue? We did that when we expanded the Pennsylvania sales tax into online transactions as a way to make sure that brick and mortars were not inadvertently disadvantaged by online retailers. My question for you is, do you think there's merit to the idea of looking at a commission to identify or evaluate potentially different sources of tax revenue from untapped industries or perhaps the untapped fields? For example, Maryland has been leader in this front. They're one of the first states in the country to do a digital advertising tax, which was anticipated to bring in $250 million in 1 year alone. They dedicated it to early childhood education. And so as we look at identifying ways to accommodate Pennsylvania's budget challenges, would like you to just expand on that if possible.
Given the fact that Pennsylvania's revenue capacity continues and its growth continues to be a challenge, I think that we've set ourselves up on a business climate perspective when it comes to that will lead to positive things. But the relative growth of the revenue base as it relates to our obligations, the obligations we need to meet, obviously the period of time from 2020 to 2022 was very different for us because it was off a trend line that we're seeing for a long period of time. Any work, bipartisan work that's done by this assembly to try to identify things that can be worked out on a bipartisan basis to help us with that would be of value, yes.
Thank you, Secretary. And I would agree. I think at the end of the day, if we look at what's driving the majority of Pennsylvania's increase in expenditures, they're frankly expenses that are expenses. They're the cost of human services, the cost of taking care of and providing for society. These are not costs that I think we can avoid and/or cut. It's just the frank reality of what it takes to care for an ailing and aging society. And so we have to figure out how do we meet that need, to your point. It's not a need that we can avoid. My second question is, we know in the governor's budget address, he talked about finally closing the Delaware loophole. I believe this is an issue that should have bipartisan support, as states like Texas, Kentucky, and Utah have a combined reporting system, as do blue states like California, New York, and Illinois. We know that 74% of corporations that do business in the Commonwealth currently don't pay any net corporate income tax. Can you just talk about the fairness, actually, component of closing the Delaware loophole, not just in terms of money that it will raise the Commonwealth, but also from the standpoint of business climate? I would argue that it actually encourages businesses not to invest in Pennsylvania because the incentive is to maintain holdings and corporate entity outside of the state so that they can offshore their profits.
Well, separate company filings, which is the system we've had since the initial enactment of the corporate net income tax, is in terms of how businesses operate on a consolidated basis with cash flow moving amongst the separate companies for their own activities to the parent company for benefit of the owners is something that needs, at least in my opinion, needs to be moved away from to a more modern system. And a more modern system that taxes all entities the same, that includes all the activity of an entity within Pennsylvania based on its presence in our marketplace. How much is your business benefiting from selling in Pennsylvania? Standard across the board. Would probably be the best thing we could do to promote fairness, because just having separate companies with companies outside the state benefiting from Pennsylvania but not being taxed here because we're not considering them on a consolidated basis, it's just a system that doesn't accommodate how current businesses work. And that's something I was concerned about earlier on, to do that, because it is a significant shift and something that businesses are not used to in filing in Pennsylvania, so there's a little more complication. But now that we're going from a 9.9 rate to 4.99, it's something that I believe is just a natural extension of what we've been doing. On the Delaware loophole, the reason to have a Delaware holding company, and this is something that's existed for a very long time, is the thought that Delaware's invested a lot in its court system and in its legal structure to be a place where companies feel that they're more appropriate and reasonable to protect their proprietary assets. But that's a business decision. It has nothing to do with taxation. If you're not doing it for a business reason, then you shouldn't be getting the tax benefit anyways. So companies can do that. They can still do that. But they shouldn't expect that the reason they're doing that is to receive a tax benefit. That was never the reason to do it in the first place.
Thank you, Secretary. Appreciate it.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Marcel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Secretary, and all the staff for being here this afternoon. I had a quick follow-up question relating to the adult use cannabis program. it was mentioned that there would be a 20% wholesale tax on products that are sold through a regulated framework of the production and sales system once legalized, plus subjecting sales to the final consumer to sales and use tax. So if I'm just a normal person at home, at the end of the day, like, who is getting taxed? Like, when you're saying that, what does that mean to just someone that might be tuning in? Like, who's actually paying that tax?
Well, if tax, you're looking at how the tax is assessed. There's always an opinion that eventually the tax is being paid by the consumer. But if you're asking where the tax is assessed, the 20% is a tax before the retail of that product at the wholesale level, and then the 6% of sales tax is paid at the counter. It's paid at the retail level. So the assessment is different than the opinions on who actually pays it, but that is something that we'd expect to be part of the conversation moving this forward.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then I wanted to just ask, so for the medicinal marijuana program that Pennsylvania currently has, is it correct that the state is collecting a 5% gross receipt tax and the grower is paying that?
That's correct.
That's correct. Do you anticipate that if we change and we adopt an adult use cannabis program, that 5% grower tax would be increased, changed in some way? Like, are they things that are correlated or not really at all?
No, we're just expecting that we'll put this new industry segment, this new platform on top of the medical marijuana platform, assuming that you have a medical marijuana dispensary that wants to get into this business. We're not planning to replace that platform with this new one.
So no changes in like future budget years that you're anticipating at this time for just the medicinal piece?
No.
Okay.
Not in our forecasting, no.
Okay, thank you. And then switching gears, I wanted to talk a little bit about the property tax relief fund. The governor's proposed budget, again, is providing a new initiative to provide additional support for fire and EMS companies by transferring $30 million from the property tax relief fund for supplemental grants to fire companies. Certainly, I support my local fire volunteers, my first responders, but I also just want to think about, like, what does this mean for having less property tax relief for homeowners across Pennsylvania, and, you know, kind of having those two important parts of our community and balancing that. If you could just comment on that.
Well, the projections allow for both. Right now, the fund as it stands, its financial position allows for us. This is something that has not happened since this was put in place back in 2003. I think the first distribution was 2005. That we've had the ability to distribute $1 billion out of that fund for purposes of broad-based property tax relief. The fund's cash flow is strong enough that it can support both. $30 million for our fire companies doesn't put at risk that proposal of $1 billion.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Bellman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Last year's budget included an employer child care tax credit, which allowed employers a tax credit that contributed to an employee's child care expenses. Can you talk a little bit about the status of the program and how many employers and employees have taken advantage and benefited from the program?
Yes.
I'm going to defer to my deputy on taxation policy.
Thank you.
Yes, we're in the process of developing the guidelines and beginning to market and roll out the program. It's just opening this year, so it's a little early. We're hoping for good participation. We realize there's a child care crisis, and this could be part of the solution.
Awesome. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Kutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back. Just a couple of questions for you, given a couple of the changes in tax structure that the governor is proposing. First, I want to start with games of skill, which currently you're proposing at a 52% tax rate. Now, that's not coming from an existing tax, correct? That's a new tax?
It's a tax that would be assessed on games of skill that are offered at different different settings in the Commonwealth, non-facility-based settings. The reason why we're setting at 52 is because we believe there should be parity.
So separate, but separate from the rate, I'm just curious, that's not an existing tax, right? You're proposing a new tax on this.
There's no taxation on it now.
Okay, so yes, that'll be a new tax. Let me flip now to financial institutions. As part of the governor's CNI phase down, you're also proposing reforms to bank shares tax, mutual thrift tax, among others. Mr. Secretary, I'm curious because as we're bringing the corporate tax rate down, you've said that many of these institutions will actually pay more in taxes, at least for several years. I'm curious if that's an oversight or if it's intended for some of these institutions to pay a higher rate until that CNI comes down to 499.
Right now, one of the problems we've had in phasing antiquated tax out of our system, when the governor had mentioned that one of the levies, actually all of them, go back to at least the late 1880s. First one, the private bank tax goes back to the Civil War. One of the challenges with it, the relative rates, effective rates that companies pay on the bank shares basis as opposed to CNI doesn't make it competitive. Doesn't make it competitive. But if you take us out in a transition that needs to happen to produce parity, transition to a CNI platform at 499 against the current rates on the banking sector, effective rates on both, banks will see a reduction in their taxes. Our fiscal projections show that. The money that will be coming in from both, if you combine both, is going down over that phase-in period.
And I appreciate that. The long term, I think that's great. I'm concerned about the short term because if these banks are going to have to pay more, ultimately my concern is over the next several years, as they're waiting for that phase down to get to 499, that they would end up passing those costs along to consumers. So that's the only reason I bring it up is I just want to make sure when people are going to their bank, they're not going to have to pay more to get their checks. They're not going to have to pay more to access their monies because we're waiting for that to get to 499.
Admittedly, a transition period here, Representative, a tradition period on a tax that's been around for 150 years, so relative to time frame, it's a relatively short period of time. There will be no way for us to have a separate corporate net income tax system.
Understood.
Just for banks.
Understood, and I agree with you. The taxes are Civil War era taxes. Certainly, that it's good that we're modernizing. I think anytime you modernize and simplify the way we tax, is going to make it easier for consumers and businesses alike. So I appreciate that. Look forward to working with you to make it easier to do business in Pennsylvania. Appreciate your time, and that's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
thank the gentleman, Representative Guzman.
You know I was up. I was following. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time this afternoon. Secretary, I'd like to talk about two particular things today in regards to lottery and skill games. And so my first question in regards to lottery is the budget briefing that you gave us a revenue, actually let's talk about this, a revenue shortfall of roughly $37 million compared to July 2024. Can you clarify what factors you believe and the department believes are driving these shortfalls, and what measures is the department taking in order to address those discrepancies?
It's really hard to identify a factor on a number that relative to total revenue capacity is that small. It's $37 million over $47 billion. So our ability to do that, it's going to be variances on all our different levies to get to that, plus or minus $1 million here, $1 million there to get there. The important thing to state in relation to performance and revenue estimate is at $37 million, variance off of $47 billion our revenue estimates, we are right on target. It's really the way to conclude on that.
Right on target. And when you mean by right on target, you mean it's mainly a margin error that the number's a little down compared to where...
A variance of $37 million in a public sector entity that is of our size, a variance like that could happen in weeks, not over a year. It could happen in weeks. It's just relative to the total revenue capacity of the Commonwealth. it's not significant enough for us to be able to identify what would cause that. The variance in producing a revenue estimate of performance, this is standard across the country, is plus or minus 2%. Plus or minus 2% is way in excess of $37 million on a $47 billion revenue base.
So anyone that says that we're spending out of our means of control and this budget is proof positive of that, what would you say to that?
I'm sorry?
So anyone that says that this budget is spending beyond our means, and of course the budget projection is a lot higher than what we anticipated, do you believe that they're making much ado about nothing?
What I can tell you is, in relation to my charge here, my mission here, that we are confident that the Commonwealth will produce in total revenue the amount that we have, the amount that the governor has certified and put into his budget. That's what I can stipulate. I'm not trying to be deflective here.
No, I appreciate that.
I need to, anything regarding the spending decisions of this assembly and the executive branch really need to be directed to the budget secretary.
Thank you. Now let me pivot very quickly to lottery. As we all know, the lottery projection about $1.94 billion in 23-24, down to $1.67 billion in 25-26. Can you briefly just talk about some of the shifting consumer behavior, changes in prize payouts and structures, and/or increased competition that may be driving the decline in lottery funds?
I would like to defer to our expert Stephanie for the answer, please.
Sure. Yeah, this fiscal year, the lottery is projected to deliver, over $1 billion in profit. It'll be the 14th straight year that we've been able to do that. But as we've talked about earlier, we are experiencing declines up against last fiscal year. So we are still estimating a decline for next fiscal year, but we are projecting it will slow a little bit, especially in the area of scratch-off. So we've had 4 straight years of decline in scratch-off sales. Like I said, there has been recent softening in the broader lottery industry, but more significantly here in Pennsylvania, we believe because of the saturated and very competitive gaming market. On the draw game side, those are largely driven by multi-state jackpots, so the Powerball and Mega Millions. So far this fiscal year, we've only had one big jackpot over $1 billion at the end of last year. In years past, we've had more than one that help boost sales and make up for the decline in scratch sales. So what you're seeing this year is the continued decline in scratch sales, although slowing, but we don't have the multi-state draw games to make up for that decline.
So it's correct to assume that the department is aware of this issue and trying to draw up some initiatives to help reverse the downtrend?
Yes, there's a couple things proposed in the governor's budget that would help the lottery. One on the games of skill side by tax and regulating them, limiting the number and putting some of the money, the tax money, into the lottery fund. And also we're looking to have those retail locations also be licensed lottery retailers, much like VGT locations are required by law to be a licensed lottery retailer as well as the casinos. And then also the other thing in the governor's proposal that would help the lottery is related to the profit margin and having that eliminated. Right now it's, we have temporary relief through 2029, but what the governor's proposing is that we once and for all eliminate that profit margin requirement because it's actually holding back lottery's ability to increase prize payouts, which will help drive sales and profits.
We have to protect the lottery. It helps aging Pennsylvanians all across the Commonwealth. My last question, and I appreciate the chairman for his indulgence, I want to talk about skill games. And I'm very happy to hear that the governor included his skill games regulation in both of his last budget addresses. However, throughout the time of that budget address and today, I've heard a lot of consternation from folks in my neck of the woods. And Senator Brown, you've represented the city of Allentown. Like Reading, we have a lot of skill games and a lot of built up constituency with business owners who have these skill games. And so the biggest consternation point that I've gotten is the 52% tax rate. And so my question to you is, has the department done any preliminary employment studies and/or viability studies that this potential tax break may have on business owners that currently have skill games within their respective establishments?
The main point here for purposes of this proposal is, I think, you're trying to This is part of the lottery's challenge in terms of its ability to compete on other things, and that the profit margin is an issue there, is to have parity. And we believe there's not enough of a distinction between the actual game that people are playing in communities that are called skill games and those games that are played in our facilities. So since we are taxing those at a certain rate, having an expectation that the rate would be the same on other similar type games is what's driving the tax in this proposal. Obviously, something for us to discuss, but that is the prime reason why there's a 52% rate here is because there's a 52% rate on other games as well. We're trying to promote parity.
But you're open to negotiation, is that correct?
Well, others, what I do know is negotiation is part of the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Vanzo.
Thank you, Chairman Harrison, and thank you, Secretary Brown, for being here today. I want to talk about the property tax rent rebates. I got an issue with one. Maybe you could help me with one. I may have a fix here. I had a constituent of mine who applied early on last year. Before the check got deposited in August, she had to close out her bank account. That check is in limbo. We've been in contact for 7 months now, and we can't get no help with it. I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on, but any help we could get from you offline after this would be great. So my question for you is, are you open for a legislative fix to where if they apply in January, let's say in 30 days, we could get that check deposited to them? Is there a holdup? Is there is there a way that we could streamline that a little bit?
You're saying have the cash flow come before July 1?
Correct, yeah.
That's something that we've been discussing. There would need to be an accommodation regarding the availability of funds and working with the treasurer as far as her timeline. But in terms of the fact that it's always been a July 1 period, in my mind, has always been just because it's always been that way.
Correct.
But our ability to actually get to a point where we can do this distribution like is done for tax refunds. When people file their tax returns, they don't have to wait everyone to July 1 to get that. It's just some administrative changes we need to make, but otherwise, something definitely worth considering.
All right, appreciate that, because I know these seniors really need to, they're waiting for this money. The other thing that I want to say with this is, you had said that the property tax relief fund could support our local EMS plus our senior citizens. And I think this is an image or a case where our constituents lose faith in us, because gaming was supposed to go to property tax relief, which we got a little bit, and the lottery is supposed to go to help our senior citizens. It doesn't say nothing about our first responders, our EMS. We heard this morning about legalizing cannabis. Instead of taking money from our senior citizens for EMS, why not explore tax on the legalization of weed? We're going to have people driving high. We're going to have accidents. Why not put something on electric vehicles? Why not throw a small fee on that? These electric vehicles are a nuisance for our fire departments. Any input on this?
Just one thing in relation to expectations. Going back to 2003 when the gaming acts were passed. Obviously, the energy in the room and the conversation that drove a lot of it was the fact that it would provide property tax relief. But when the Act 1 and Act 2 of, I think it's 2003, were passed, there was a lot of conversations about other things that would be a part of this, and they have been a part of it for the last 20 years. And that is 5.5% for economic development, 4% for local services, local share. The horse race development fund, which is 8.8%, total coming to 34%, adding these on to 52%. That's how you get to the 52% total tax. Mm-hmm. Those have been part of the conversation from the beginning. And I believe, if I'm correct, that the first allocation that we did out of the gaming fund at that time also included a distribution for fire companies. So we're talking about a long-standing thing. Obviously, the matter that people mostly focus on as it relates to the use of these dollars is property taxes for for a lot of reasons, one of the reasons being it's the highest levy, 34% goes to it. But I don't think you're going afield based on what's been going on and the commitments this assembly has been making out of this fund over a long period of time. If you use some of it for some of these other things, because these funds have been targeted for those important purposes for a long time.
I got you, and I appreciate your input on that. If I went up to a volunteer fireman and say, listen, I'm going to get you more money, but we're going to take it off of that senior citizen. I mean, our first responders are stand-up guys. I don't know that they would take that money off a senior citizen like that. I just think we're pitting two vulnerable groups against one another, and I'm not real fond of that. So thank you for your time.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, and team. Thanks for all the work. I keep saying this, all the work you had to do to get this far, and I know there's a long road ahead of us. I think this is sort of a short question, maybe a little bit longer answer, but in 2023 with Act 7, we expanded the rent rebate, property tax rebate program. It's been almost 2 full budget cycles since then, so if you would, can you give us some of the data about our successes and how it's doing for revenue?
I'm going to take that one. So it's been a great success. We have 525,000 recipients that we processed. There were up to 120,000 new recipients receiving that money for the first time. We did not have any big delays. Everything was sent out on time. I don't know if there's anything to add, Pat. It's just we appreciated the challenge and rose to it.
Yeah, we were concerned about the ability to accommodate expansion, given the fact that we've had some issues with our complement. We've been trying to fill our vacancies, and going to 120,000 new recipients at a very important program that we covet, along with the members of the Assembly, initially concerned us. But a lot of our team here did a tremendous job of pulling it all together. For me, not only the fact that we had 120,000 new people, but in the past, there was a lot more forms that were filed. The word used internally is suspensions, that they don't get approved and are set aside for other review. The amount of suspensions that we saw were only 10% the ones we saw 2 years before that. And that's with 120,000 new recipients.
Can you clarify a little bit? 120,000, was that the 23-24 year, or is that total over?
That's a new population that was not being served before until you voted for the expansion.
Okay. And is there any sort of trend that first year it was a big jump and sort of plateaued, or?
I think we, for the most part, there's always going to be more that will, it won't be the total number that would qualify. We believe we got a vast majority of those would otherwise would qualify. The one thing that was really important that was done as part of your work, which was, I thought, an issue for years, is what we were seeing in the past was phasing down because people's incomes were going up and we weren't adjusting for inflation. That was an enormous change, and there's very few programs in the Commonwealth that have that inflationary adjustment. Right. So we won't see the drop anymore. The numbers we're seeing now, unless we have a population increase in the senior population, should stabilize. It shouldn't go down again.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your testimony today. I first wanted to start out in the area of opportunity lost, or what we're viewing as potential opportunity lost for revenue in Pennsylvania. And that's kind of building on that we all agree new jobs, putting people to work, not only benefits the economy, but it also increases the tax revenues in both wage taxes and sales tax, because new workers buy new things. You know, the gentlelady from Fayette County recognized the workforce shortage. I wanted to, earlier the previous testifier, we talked a little bit about able-bodied workers, you know, and the economy has, right, in Pennsylvania, we're recognizing about 170,000 able-bodied workers without dependents that this administration has yet for another year, this past summer, waived that 20-hour-a-week work requirement. For your department, you know, when 170,000 workers aren't working 20 hours a week, what is the impact in lost tax revenue?
I'd have to do a forecast for you, Representative. I don't have that on the top of my head.
It may not, it may be affected by our tax forgiveness program if they're lower income earners as well.
Yes, there could be a difference there. I think when we calculate that, it would be, you know, roughly 100,000 of those people off the couch and into the workforce would be about 40 million in tax revenue. And if we got all of those, 170,000, that would be about 65 million in tax revenue, not including sales tax gained. And when we talk about opportunity lost, at the same time, if we increase minimum wage, as I understand it, in 2023, your department produced a report that said there would be a slowdown in personal income tax because of the lag, and also that we would potentially lose 12,800 jobs as a result. If minimum wage goes up, it's kind of recognized that citizens are going to lose jobs. Is that accurate?
Part of our projection has a small job loss. We believe a lot of that is the fact that someone will be able to work one job rather than three.
So if MSN 3 months ago, right, says that Pennsylvania is, our job market defies the odds because we have the lowest unemployment rate, 13 consecutive months of the lowest unemployment rate since all the way back in '79. But we're keeping 170,000 workers, waiving their requirements to work so that they can stay at home. I mean, your own analysis says that 12,000 jobs will be lost. Wouldn't we be better, I guess, wouldn't all of us benefit from more workers working and engaging workers in the workforce, which would generate more revenue than losing 12,000 jobs to get 50 million in revenue?
I appreciate your point, Representative, but there is a balance here. And when you have policies that are in place that have not been updated in years, that put people in places where they're, even if they are working, they're working well below the poverty line. When the market is driving this conversation now, in my region, the minimum wage legally doesn't even match what the actual minimum wage in the marketplace is.
I would agree with you.
And we're not even considering that. If we're thinking the marketplace can accommodate a 5, which it can in many parts of the state, it's going to be different depending on where you are, can accommodate a higher wage, what are we losing? The market can already accommodate that.
I appreciate that, because if the question is what are we losing, what are we also not gaining, because workers are already earning more? If you had mentioned earlier the difference between static and dynamic analysis, when we talked about loss in revenues from the absence or the cancellation of projects, does your department moving forward, and I know it wouldn't be right now, but if Ohio in 2023 had $13 billion in new energy and manufacturing investment, West Virginia had $4.5 billion. Those are hundreds of thousands of man-hours of work and revenues. Pennsylvania, we only had $215 million of announced new private investment in energy and manufacturing. Does your department have the ability to analyze the opportunity lost in wage and business taxes through the absence of that investment?
Well, as of right now, our revenue estimating is, this has been the case, the standard for most places and the standard for us for a long time is done on a static basis. It's not done on a dynamic basis. So the estimates you see on proposals, on fiscal notes, are all done based on the realities that exist right now. If we were charged, we would have to go to an outside party to do such an analysis and work with others to do a dynamic modeling analysis. We don't have that capacity now, but something that would potentially have some value.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We thank the gentleman. Representative Friel.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Chairman. I think this is a good discussion on minimum wage because the proposal in the governor's budget is $15 an hour, and you have some assumptions in there. Can you just talk a little bit about moving that up? It's about $500 million, if I look at it, or better, to the economy. Where is, who's likely to be the recipient of that $500 million? Meaning, I would imagine that when we're moving minimum wage up, we're talking about some of our lowest paid employees in the state, right? And we're going to be putting $500 million of purchasing power into our lowest socioeconomic folks in the state. How's that, going to return in the economy? And do you think that's a good move for putting $500 million back into the local economy in those locations, and what might that look like?
Yes, I think it absolutely would. And what I can speak to is what we'll do to this conversation here. We have growth projections that come as a result of increased earned income, increased spending power that will produce in full year $102 million for the general fund. And you need to have economic activity for that to happen. There used to be, I think in 2019, 1.7 million workers who would benefit from this assembly, this government's adjusting the minimum wage to accommodate what exists in our surrounding states. That has shrunk by about 50% since that time, and that just reflects the fact that the economies in our communities are finding out for themselves what they can afford, and they can afford to accommodate a 15% minimum wage, $15 minimum wage, that we are projecting will help the fiscal position of this Commonwealth.
And also, I'll just ask you to reflect on this as well. If we're putting and moving folks off of, let's say, a poverty wage and up to $15 an hour, that's going to have an upward wage pressure, right? And the idea behind that, I imagine, is to see some of these social safety nets and folks who are qualified for some of them to start to move out of poverty and out of the need for those. Because if I'm working today at minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, in all likelihood, I am going to need some of those social safety nets, and I'll qualify for all of them, which is an expense to the state. Is that correct?
And that's an excellent point, Representative, as well, because right now our fiscal projections accommodate just what changes would be in terms of additional taxes that we paid on $15 an hour, loss of eligibility to the special poverty provision, but we don't include in this loss of other possible things that the Commonwealth would have to spend as spending now. So the benefit to the Commonwealth, if you take it more on a macro basis beyond just that special poverty provision, would potentially be higher. That's correct.
Well, thank you for that. I really think this is a really good, as we're moving folks into this, I think the economic benefits of spending, $500,000 in some of our neighborhoods that probably could benefit the most from it. It's not only going to help, hopefully lift some folks out of poverty, but also help those businesses and us to kind of reignite the economies in those local businesses. And that goes to that Main Street business and seeing them. And I think it's a cycle that we'd like to see repeated. So I thank you for the proposal, and I look forward to working with you on it. Sorry, I didn't use my full 5 minutes. Apologize.
That is perfectly okay. Representative Alzheimer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Secretary, is it the purpose of the governor to increase minimum wage to generate $50 million in revenue?
It's one of our responsibilities to estimate what it means financially to the Commonwealth, but I wouldn't tag that as the purpose why he's doing it, no.
Okay. Regarding tax credits, Mr. Secretary, the governor is proposing a new tax credit to encourage employment-related economic development programs and will be based on taxable wages paid. What types of economic development programs is the governor hoping to attract with this program?
That may be a question more for DCED.
I'm not really sure you're referring to, Representative.
Okay.
The new.
Yeah, the new.
Are you referring to the advanced PA
Yes.
program?
Yes.
There's no target business segment that be administered. It's our responsibility for administering the credit. It's Commerce Department, DCED, to actually use the credit for purposes of attraction. At this point in time, I don't think they've specifically put themselves in a position where we're going to target individual industries. It's just opportunities. And they're making sure that this version of the credit, which is a replacement of an old credit that we had before that was a job creation tax credit, actually targets activity. It's one thing that we've learned from a replacement credit that we eliminated several years ago is it actually has to produce some additional jobs for the value of $10 million that we're going to spend. So that one thing that you can be certain on is it's not just going to be another $10 million that doesn't produce anything. That's one of the reasons why some of these analysis we do on these tax credits, the IFO does have some value. It allows us to adjust to make sure we're doing them right.
Okay, thank you. So earlier today, the DCED secretary stated through REMAP, they identified tax credits to be eliminated as underutilized. Specifically, he identified the waterfront tax credit, among others, to be eliminated by the governor. Mr. Secretary, did you have any input into the elimination of these tax credits? And do you agree they are underutilized and ineffective?
Based on what's the current utilization of these different programs, utilization will be determined by those who come and use the program through DCED. It's our responsibility to administer them again. That the claims being made that we can better use that $10 million for something that's more targeted and more beneficial to job creation or something that's supported by DCED's activities, yes.
Okay, so just so I understand it correctly, so you believe then that they are underutilized, is that correct?
The reason why it's justified converting to a new tax using that $10 million, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Brown. I appreciate your work. First, I want to say about the idea of Medicaid work requirements, and I appreciate your position on and the governor's position on it. I can tell you as a healthcare provider, adding more strings, adding more hoops that people have to jump so they can get access to healthcare is really cruel, and it doesn't actually address the reasons why people often aren't working, actually finding a job, childcare, transportation, things like that. Regarding minimum wage, I'm someone who actually lived on minimum wage. It was actually about 20 years ago, and I was making what minimum wage is now. I was living in California at the time, working as a barista, making about $7 an hour, and as many hours as I could get for my $500 a month that I had to pay in housing costs, and living as frugally as possible. Sometimes I had to ask my parents to send me a check, or my brother to send me a check for $100 so I could cover rent. That's how hard it is to stretch $7.25 an hour. So I appreciate your comments about the impact on the economy for Pennsylvania. I think in addition to lifting people out of poverty, can you also talk about in terms of competitiveness? You know, when you have one employer as a small business who is trying to do the right thing and is paying their employees, you know, $15 an hour, but then you have a competitor that's paying them minimum wage, which is $7.25. Can you talk a little bit about how actually this can help make Pennsylvania more competitive and small businesses more competitive?
I think having a wage scale in terms of those who look to Pennsylvania as a place to live and work, businesses do not move to communities that are on that have challenges growing. that don't have a population growth. They don't project population growth. And when your wage scales are possibly a lot lower than places around you, it is a lot harder to attract folks to live there. So competition amongst businesses is far in excess of just tax competition. The biggest thing is the resources they would otherwise need to be competitive, and workforce availability is probably number one.
Thank you. My last question is on MyPath. I know that you all have been working on a system to make it easier for people to file their income taxes. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done on this and sort of what people can expect when they use MyPath?
Yeah, sure. So this year, two things that we implemented were direct file. So we are participating in IRS direct file program. That is a good no-cost option for Pennsylvanians to file. Many will qualify for that. Also this year, we implemented a logged-in version to file your personal income taxes. In doing that, we can pre-pop data for you, so that makes it easier as well. We'll pre-populate your W-2 data, some 1099 data as well. And so those are probably the two biggest ones this year, and feedback's been very good so far.
Thanks for working on that. I think as much as you can make it easier for people to file their income taxes, the better. So I appreciate your work on that. Thank you.
We thank the gentleman. Representative Barton.
Thank you, Chairman Harris, Secretary Brown, and panel. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Secretary, this morning, and I'll talk about some skill games if that's all right. This morning at the Senate hearing, you stated that there was no difference between a slot machine and I won't get the quote exactly, so it's not an exact quote. No difference between a slot machine and a skill game, and they should be taxed the same. And my good gentleman from Berks County discussed this a little bit also, and I guess I think it makes sense to ask or mention that the courts have consistently and constantly stated that skill machines require an element of skill. So with that said, how do you square that comment?
It's not enough of a distinction, Representative, to accommodate a different tax structure, though.
Could you say it? I apologize.
There's not enough of a distinction between the two types of machines to accommodate a difference in tax structure.
Is that your opinion, or is that a court opinion?
That's my opinion. I do not believe it's the opinion of the governor. I'm speaking on behalf of the administration.
Thank you.
That there is not enough of a distinction between the two to accommodate competition and parity in activities amongst gaming. At least in terms of a tax structure, there's not enough of a distinction between these two types of gaming to accommodate different rates on the two different machines.
Okay. So thank you. Secretary, do you know, speaking still on the skill games, do you know when the draft language of the governor's proposal will be available?
As soon as it's available, Representative, I'll make sure it's available to you.
Thank you. So, in a little bit more specifically, what places or venues would qualify as an establishment? Bars, C-stores, restaurants?
We don't expect that any of the current establishments where these operate. We are trying to make, and speaking on behalf of the Department of Revenue, trying to make something that currently exists, something that is part of the overall regulated gaming activity. We're not anticipating that we're going to be changing the venues on which these operate. Just put them within the framework of which we've applied the same structure to the same type of gaming. VGTs are probably the closest thing, and we have a statewide system that does that now. We look to just expand that current platform that the Gaming Control Board, Department of Revenue has to more venues that have these types of games. 30,000 games, now 40,000 games by 2930, around 5,000 locations.
Okay, so then as it relates to establishments, I mean, how many establishments will be allowed to operate skill games? How many machines will each establishment be allowed to have? Is that
we're expecting 5 machines per establishment. Well, that's what the regulatory structure anticipates. Yes.
Okay. And how's my time? Lastly, thank you, Secretary. Lastly, the I think Representative Kutz, and you established that this is a new tax. But as it relates to VFWs, American Legions, is there a consideration for our veterans organizations to not be taxed? Has that brought up or been considered?
It'd be very hard to have no tax on one activity of the same type. We'd have probably a serious uniformity problem there. That's part of the challenge that we've had over a long period of time in expanding gaming in the Commonwealth is conflicts amongst the different types of venues.
No, I understand the complication. Right. It's just representing our veterans and supporting our veterans.
Totally agree with you. Understand your concerns there. The per machine cost of $250 per machine, $1,000, given the fact that the average amount of activity on these machines is $264 per day. We believe that the economics of that allow even our fire companies to accommodate being part of this regulated system.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chairman Matton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here and your staff. I want to return to the minimum wage question. In 2011, President Barack Obama commissioned a study of over 700 economists, many of them Nobel laureates. And at that time, it was determined that if we had raised the minimum wage to $11 an hour back then, 50% of the population living in poverty would have been lifted out of poverty. Now it's 14 years later, and we're talking about a $15 minimum wage. And one of my colleagues spoke about how if we pay people a living wage, then they don't have to collect public assistance and all the other services. I'm wondering if you know or if there is any available studies that $15 an hour minimum wage gets us there, because that's $2,400 a month income. And when you think about what your rent is going to be and your other expenses, does $15 an hour get us there? Does it get people out of poverty? Does it achieve a living wage in which a single person can work and live in the state of Pennsylvania?
No, the goal of the $15 minimum wage is to allow families with children to average family in Commonwealth to rise above the poverty level. Right now, the 725 families are $17,000 below just what is considered federal poverty. So that is one of the goals of this, is to do that.
Okay, but does $15 an hour get us there? Really? I mean, realistically, should the legislature be looking at a progression where it gets higher?
At this point in time, the charge of our department is to advance what would be the value to this body, value of the Commonwealth, to a $15 minimum wage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today. I wanted to ask a couple follow-up questions as it relates to the skill games discussion. It was brought to my attention that the proposed regulation is something like 30,000 total machines, 5 maximum machines per establishment. How are we defining machines?
Defining the machine in statute?
Yeah, what is a machine?
Skill game machine.
So it's not a slot machine?
Well, whatever we define as skill games, and right now it's something that exists in venues throughout the Commonwealth.
But it's not a slot machine.
Well, the games that will be defined as games that exist right now in separate venues in the Commonwealth.
So we want parity when it comes to tax rates, but not parity when we're defining what a slot machine is.
Not enough, Representative. I don't believe there's enough of a distinction between these two types of gaming activities to justify.
But we're defining them differently. We're defining them differently with this proposed.
Taxation.
But we are defining them differently for purposes of how many can exist. Because surely there's more than 5 slot machines in a casino, correct?
Current activity allows for us to have.
Why are we drawing this distinction?
Drawing this distinction, we're not drawing a distinction in regards to taxation. No.
But why? Why are we drawing this distinction?
Because there's not enough of a distinction between the activities to actually, from a taxation perspective, to justify it.
But there is enough of the distinction to define it differently.
Representative, I respectfully disagree.
But I'm assuming that machine does not include slot machine in this definition, correct?
Does not, no.
So we're drawing that distinction to limit how many.
But there's not enough, there is a distinction between the two. There's not enough of a distinction between these two activities to draw a distinction for taxation.
Help me understand the logic here. Help me understand what this is, what that distinction is, why that makes any sense whatsoever.
It makes any sense whatsoever. The activity that people engage in, go play a skill game and play a slot machine, there's not a distinction between the activities that people engage in to have a distinction when it comes to taxation. These types of activities are competing against each other.
And I understand that argument. I understand. I don't agree with it. I get what you're saying. What I don't get is why are we drawing a distinction on how many machines we could have and not including slot machines in that?
We're trying to set up a regulated market for existing activity that we believe is responsible within Commonwealth community.
So on the one hand, it's the same, and on the other hand, we're going to treat them differently.
Well, the fact that we have limits on the number of slot machines that exist in facilities is something we did as well. We had numbers of slot machines in facilities. We have numbers of facilities. Each one of these regulatory platforms have requirements and limits to how much activity they can be. So that is not different than when we did 20 years ago and continue to do as it relates to licensed facilities. We believe that the current projection of 30,000 machines now, 40,000 machines 5 years from now, five machines per establishment is the most responsible way to start a regulated activity for skill games in this Commonwealth, something that's been existing non-regulated, not part of an activity, while the other types of gaming, lottery, facility-based gaming, has been strictly and comprehensively regulated for over 20 years. We've had skill games that have been operating with none.
I understand the logic between what you're saying right now. What I don't understand is how we're drawing a distinction. We want parity at the tax rate because they're the same, but we're not going to treat them the same when it comes to regulating how many we can have within an establishment. It seems like it ought to be a slot machine the same, or
250, that would mean, Representative, you would be allowing 2,500 slot machines in a gas station.
Well, that's your proposal, not mine.
No,
that's according to the logic you're proposing.
Our proposal is 5 slot machines per
Okay, establishment. What does establishment mean?
Current operating facility that has a skill game.
Current operating facility. According to my numbers, and I'm not great at math, that's why I went to law school, so you might want to correct me here. According to my numbers, that's about 5,900 establishments at 5 machines an establishment. There's a lot more than 5,900 establishments right now. Which establishments will no longer have machines in them? Who's making that decision?
Have to determine those who actually come forward first, be part of the regulatory environment. We believe there is currently 70,000 operating machines in the Commonwealth right now, and our fiscal projections are based on the fact that we're going to be allowing for 30,000 to expand to 40.
Has the economic impact been considered?
Oh,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Has concluded.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank the gentleman. Chairman Samuelson.
Thank you very much, Chair Harris. Thank you, Secretary Brown. I do want to comment just briefly. I know earlier there was discussion of the $37 million on the revenue estimate. I want to point out that $37 million on $46 billion is less than 1%. It's less than 0.1%. It's actually 0.08%. So it's very, very close to the mark. Another way to look at it is for every $1,000 in the state budget, the estimate was off by 80 cents. So 0.08% is pretty spot on. I do want to ask a couple of questions on the MyPath system. I know people can do their Pennsylvania taxes on MyPath. They can do their property tax rent rebate on the MyPath. What percentage of people are using it for income taxes? What percent are using it for rebates?
I don't know that off the top, but for property tax rent rebate, we had 26% filing via MyPath, and that was the highest yet.
Okay.
That was good. For PIT, I'd have to double check that.
Okay, but each year we're trying to get the number to grow.
Yeah, and it's been increasing every year.
Okay. My office, we do 1,000 of the rebates, and we do every single one on the MyPath system, but I realize we're trying to get the word out to have other folks utilize that. I do want to say a couple of things on the early rebates. I know the gentleman from Miss Westmoreland suggested that we have the early rebates, send out the checks before July 1st. I know the Secretary has been working on this and strategizing. We do have a bill. Representative Cepeda Freitas from Berks County has a bill that would say when you file your rebate and it's approved by the Department of Revenue, the check should be able to go out before July 1st. So we will be taking up that bill in the Finance Committee this spring. It will not be effective for 2025. The rebates will still be July 1st, but we hope that if we can get that passed, maybe in 2026 and beyond. On the property tax rent rebate, we had a significant, historic expansion last year. It was about 400,000 people. Now it's about 525,000 people getting the rebate. And we included a cost of living adjustment so the amount goes up. We significantly expanded the income limits. Last year it went up to 45,000. This year with the COLA, it's 46,520. So up into that level, 46,520, net income, you can deduct half of your Social Security, you can get a rebate. And you can check that out in many places, the Area Agency on Aging, your legislator's office, Department of Revenue, the MyPath system. I believe the word is still getting out, because when we passed that law 2 years ago, we thought it was going to be about 570,000 people who would be eligible. It's 525,000. I want you to comment on that in terms of why we're not quite up to the 570 we projected.
You continue to, in my experience with this, it's always 100% penetration. Continue to advertise, promote, work with you to see if we can get the total numbers who are actually coming into your office, coming in using MyPath to apply and benefit from this program, because obviously if there's any variance between total numbers in the Commonwealth that could benefit and those that apply, we have more work to do.
And I appreciate ongoing cooperation between the Department of Revenue and the legislature. I know Representative Kincaid and others have raised the issue that Department of Revenue has outreach events all over the state. Each of us has a lot of outreach events. I'm going to 19 places in my community to do rebates on site. We bring our laptop and our scanner with us to do the MyPath on site. But I would anticipate and I'd hope that you'd have cooperation with us on making sure that when you're going into a community, you're working with the local state senator, you're working with the local representatives, so we're not crossing paths or doubling up on the work or finding a way to cooperate to get the word out to the most people possible. Similar question on the child care tax credit, child independent care tax credit. We tripled that 2 years ago, and it's now effective. I think you said earlier there's 220,000 people who are getting a child and development tax credit. Could be as little as $600, could be as much as $2,100, depending on a person's income and how many children they have. 220,000 is how many applied. How many do you think are eligible statewide who could be applying for this? And are we reaching that number? My understanding there was a lot more people who could be getting this than have been signing up.
So it's based off the federal tax credit, and we have found that of the people who filed the federal tax credit, they are also filing here in Pennsylvania for that credit. So I think if there were any gap, they're also not applying for the federal credit. I hadn't heard there was a gap between those who applied and those who were eligible, because I thought the federal tax credit had
Most
better
folks who are signing up for the federal child independent care tax credit are also taking the time to get the one from Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Now that we have it, and now that we tripled it just 2 short years ago.
Especially if you're using a practitioner or software, the software will take you right to it. I think, Representative, I'll confirm this for you, Mr. Chairman, that we were pretty close to what we were projecting in terms of the total who received the credit. There was not a very big variance between qualification and receipt.
Okay. Final point, I just want to thank you for your cooperative efforts. Encourage those to continue. I know we had some backlogs a couple of years ago, but in my view, they've been addressed, and people are getting their tax rebates, their tax refunds processed in a timely manner, and the rebates are going out relatively quickly, but we can always be vigilant on that. In each of our offices, we get a lot of calls when that doesn't happen. We appreciate you helping us out.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Griner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, and others for being here today. I do want to start off by thanking all of you, and I want to thank Matt and your staff too. Wonderful, everybody. If there's questions, some of your secretaries have helped me as well. I want to thank you for that. This might be somewhat of a lightning round. Hopefully, the Chairman gives me a little bit of latitude here, but IFO projections indicate that the general fund surplus will be depleted in 25-26, and that the rainy day fund would be depleted in 26-27. The money that's in the rainy day fund can only be assessed with a 2/3 vote of the House members, and that's when there's a fiscal emergency, beyond spending more than we take in. What fiscal emergency would exist that would require us to pull money from the rainy day fund? Now, before you go, let me just preface. I know we're talking about marijuana, and we're talking maybe games, skill games, but I don't know if that's going to be enough revenue. But anyway, I'll let you answer now.
As a CPA representative, you'll recognize this. I'm charged to be here to defend and advocate for a proposal, but no, not below the funds available line on the financial statement.
I understand. I just wanted to ask because of the projections, so it was question number one. Second question, it's been talked about before. The upcoming budget seeks to consolidate, the bank-related taxes, the bank shares, mutual thrift, private bank taxes, and switch them over to corporate net income tax. Did the administration, have there been any discussions with the stakeholders, the bankers, the associations, concerning this proposal as it was presented, as it was crafted?
Over a long period of time, I've had many conversations, both as an administrative official and as a member of this assembly, with the banking community regarding this. And a lot of times, Mr. Chairman, it's come down to effective rates. And many understand the virtue of going to the system that they've been using out of Washington forever, away from a value model to a cash flow model. But what they would tell me was, we can't justify it because the rate doesn't allow us to. Now, given the work of this chamber and the work of the Senate, adjusting the C&I rate down to a competitive rate that will bring it down their effective rate in the new system below where they are now. Because that was the final answer I got. I always got the same answer, and that was, you get the C&I effective rate below the bank shares tax rate, or competitive with it?
Has anybody had that discussion in the last 3 months with them, though? That they're aware that, I'm going to be up front, my understanding is they were unaware this was coming, that this proposal was coming.
I can't speak to that.
The only thing I'm worried about, too, is maybe picking winners and losers. You look at some of our larger banks in the state versus some of our small community banks. I am somewhat trying to get my hands around whether we're going to have winners and losers depending on, it's just funny. Right now we're doing it on equity. We're doing, the tax is based on the capital for most banks. But anyway, I just hope they're at the table and that they'd be there, which kind of segues into the the combined reporting. I think I've asked this question for the last 10 years. We did get a proposal last year in the legislature that I did not think was a real strong proposal. In fact, I guess it passed with like 100 no votes here in the House, something like that. Are we going to be able to, and I will say I know the business community was not at the table to discuss this, NFIB, PA Chamber, and others were not. Combined reporting, as you mentioned, is something that a lot of states are moving forward with, maybe more than half. I think it is more than half. Can we have a discussion, a robust discussion with them at the table so that there's a meeting of the minds? Because somebody had mentioned this, and it is correct. With combined reporting, you got to get that tax rate down to 4.99 or close to it in order for it not to be it's most people don't understand this before not to be a tax increase. It's despite the fact we're reducing the rate, you got to reduce that rate low enough. And I'm just asking and encouraging that the business community, because they were not there last year.
This is primarily an issue of revenue base, than it is rate. You know, the fact that you see a higher number on the consolidated reporting side than you do on the rate side, on a differential, giving a positive number, is the fact that there's a lot of activity out there that is benefiting off the Pennsylvania marketplace and a consolidated group that's not paying the tax. So we're not, you know, if it was a point of the fact that we were raising a rate on something that was already being taxed, I'd understand that. But there's just this separate company system, and you know this, Representative, it does not match the current realities of cash flow in companies, you know, in terms of their business, in terms of how they do business.
I'm just saying, I still think, though, the business community has to be at the table.
Absolutely they do.
That's all
Absolutely.
I'm just asking. And then one quick last final question, Mr. Chairman, if you give me a little bit of time. The tax credit, the new economic development tax credit, I know you had mentioned we had one here in the Commonwealth and it wasn't that effective. Can you kind of tell me what the difference is, or why you think this new one may be effective or more effective than the old one was?
The allocation is going to be based on actual wages, and it's more of an incremental credit than it is a tax credit off an increment of wages. It has to actually tie to jobs.
Okay.
The reason why we got rid of the other one that was a job creation tax credit was a report from the IFO says we're spending $10 million and getting nothing for it.
Right.
So there was every reason for us to repeal that. The Commerce folks, DCD folks, Secretary Siger have noted that, since that was something that DCD participated in the last one, and is adjusting the parameters of this one to make sure that that's not happening again.
I just wanted to be sure that, you know, what the difference was, because I knew we tried, been there, done that, didn't work. What were we doing different?
Understand.
So I appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, Chairman Struzzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I know it's been a long day of hearings for you and for all of us, so I'll try to be succinct as possible. A quick question related to minimum wage. If we were to increase the minimum wage to $15, would you foresee a profit loss for small businesses?
Our projections, Mr. Chairman, there is, because a business will be paying more in terms of salary, our projections of $41 million in increased PIT includes lower profits of small businesses at $76 million, and that makes sense because the deduction for the higher wages is higher. But in the mix of things, when you add in the $120 million from the wages and offset that against the decrease in profits, higher profits for small business because of more spending power at $3 million, and decrease from wage earners because we had talked about that. We're estimating a slight job loss, that the total amount coming from that is $40 million on a yearly basis. In terms of total spending power, $60 million for a total impact for purposes of our budget conversation, $103 million.
Because, well, I'd appreciate if you could share that information with us. The report that your office submitted back in 2023 to the Appropriations Office shows that annually, these small businesses are looking at almost $3 billion in losses if the wages were to be increased to $15 in the outlying years. So just the report that you provided, or the Department of Revenue provided, shows that in 25-26, a $2.8 billion loss in profit for small businesses. So I appreciate sharing the information you have. Maybe, you know, it's different than what you provided in 2023, but that's a significant loss for small businesses, and I think that should be a concern. The next question.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make sure that we get you something. I don't believe that that's a possibility that our projection would show that, but whatever we have, we'll get to you.
Okay. And do you believe that new jobs and new businesses coming to this Commonwealth would equal an increase in state revenues?
New business coming in Commonwealth would increase state revenues.
Yes.
Any new investment, if it's if it's tied to actual increased sales, then we're talking new revenues from sales and wages for workers.
Okay.
Right now, we don't factor in someone's investment for purposes of allocating receipts for taxation here. We just use sales for that. So an investment doesn't matter. But if a new business comes in, pays salaries, and a result of being closer to our market has higher sales, yes, absolutely.
So building on what my colleague from Westmoreland County said earlier about missed opportunities, the fact that we haven't had any investment in energy in 5 or 6 years since the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative was introduced, and we know those billions of dollars have gone to other states like Ohio and West Virginia, that lack of investment in energy production in Pennsylvania has resulted in lost revenues. Would you agree with that?
It would mainly result in lost revenues from lack of investment from the payroll and sales tax from spending payroll in the Pennsylvania market. I can't speak to the delta between what was invested and what wasn't. That's for the Commerce Department.
But you would say if that investment had been made, we would see increased revenues.
If you have more workers and you have more cash flow, then the revenue capacity of the Commonwealth will obviously be higher, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my last question, looking at the budget, we see an increase in spending of $3.5 billion at a time when revenues are expected to not even come close to meeting that need for the increase in spending. And we know that we just had a discussion about drawing down the rainy day fund, drawing down the surplus. If we continue to spend like this without new revenues, and some of these revenues that have been proposed are iffy at best, do you foresee the need for a broad-based tax increase just 2 or 3 years from now if we continue to spend like we're spending?
Mr. Chairman, I can speak to our projections regarding our proposals under current law. 3% average over the next 5 years. I can speak to them in terms of the proposals that are in the governor's budget at 5% increase on this current cycle. Any decisions on additional revenue capacity that have resulted from additional spending that's passed by this Assembly, that's something I have to defer to the Budget Secretary.
But just from a pure revenue perspective, if spending is more than revenues that are coming in, somehow you have to fill that gap, correct?
To decide what your spending is will determine that. That's correct.
And that could result in a broad-based tax increase.
You can't make, there's many things that could happen, Mr. Chairman. We went through a period of time when I shared your job in this Assembly, where we were starting with deficits. Our financial position was in a deficit position for many, many years. During that period of time, the Assembly decided, across the Assembly with the governor, not to raise broad-based taxes to solve that problem. So that's not the only way to as you know, to potentially deal with the deficit.
Yes, and I appreciate that, and I think my point is I don't want to see us get to that point. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned earlier you are a licensed CPA, correct?
I admit it, yes. Maybe I shouldn't have.
With your background, what is your thoughts on a minimum wage increase effect on the state's budget and fiscal outlook?
Using whatever background I do have, working with my team, the effect on the state budget is a positive. We have a projection that shows if we advance the governor's proposal of $15 minimum wage, we will realize an additional $120 million on an annual basis to our revenue capacity. That, in the context of the spending conversation that was going to go on very soon, will be helpful.
Now, when you did those projections, did that include any decrease in services for those folks?
It did not. No. The projections include one item that I think needs to be considered because it's right on top, that would affect someone who goes to $15 minimum wage, is the likelihood that they would qualify for the special poverty exemption. For many, for those folks would go down. So the amount that we would get, you have to provide for that program would be less. But other programming within other agencies, that's not part of that projection. No.
But theoretically, based off of your knowledge, would the state save money on other social services?
Just like the targeted group of people that qualify for special poverty is the same group of people that would fit within a lot of our programming, I think that is highly probable.
So, an increase in the minimum wage would increase our revenue, but it would also more than likely decrease some of our spending on social service programs. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I think, frankly, that's a very good analysis to do. That's not an analysis that we've done on the spending side. If I recall correctly, in the past when we've had minimum wage proposal on the table, the modeling was done to actually determine what that was. I don't think it has not been done with this cycle, but that type of analysis would be of tremendous value.
Okay. So, Mr. Secretary, do you know, maybe one of your deputies here, a family, let's say, of 3, what would they have to make this? What's the highest that that family could make and still be considered below the poverty line?
It's $9,500 for each claimant, $6,500 for each dependent. So if it was a single mother with 2 children, that would be about $22,000.
How much is that an hour? I'm sorry, I'm not that good at. I'm not as good at math as y'all. That's why I have a good executive director. She does the math.
A single mother with 2 children is about $22,000. Below that, she would get tax forgiveness. So the jump from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour, if she were working full time, would move her out of poverty and also move her out of the tax forgiveness.
Okay. But if we don't increase the minimum wage, that mother, 2 children would be considered in poverty, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And just simple knowledge says folks who are below the poverty line, they qualify for SNAP, LIHEAP, medical assistance, all of those kind of programs currently. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Those programs are heavily funded by the federal government. Would you agree with that?
That's correct, yes.
So if there was a pullback in federal funds and we did not increase the minimum wage, then that mother of 3 could find herself without medical assistance, SNAP, or LIHEAP assistance, correct?
In doing that analysis, a lot of the programs that are administered by the Human Services Department are jointly funded. So we could, the issue will be, it will be our obligation to make up that difference. That'll be the issue. But just on dollars and cents, if the money's not available for us to provide for those benefits, those folks would, if they qualify now and would not, they qualify now if we don't raise the minimum wage, that would be a problem, yeah.
So it is your statement that if there was a pause in federal resources and that mother was still eligible, we would have to make the difference up?
I'm not saying that. I'm not sure. It would depend on the program. I'm just saying I don't know at this, sitting here at this point in time, kind of the situation we had with healthcare and in the healthcare expansion when we did that during the pandemic. The question came up as to whether, when that was rolled off, would the state be the one that would have to legally be required to make it the difference? That would be an open question for any of these programs if that was pulled back, because we are contractually obligated in a lot of these programs to service them. But assuming that the money is there, and someone's taken off, past $15 an hour, and they come off the minimum wage, their benefit from those programs obviously go down. But if the money's not there and they stay in the minimum wage, there could be a challenge with still receiving those programs, yes.
So to summarize, if we increase the minimum wage $120 million to the positive for our finances, correct?
That's correct.
And while we don't have a number, we do believe that there will be a reduction in our spending because those folks will no longer be on certain services, correct?
Based on my knowledge of those programs, that's correct, yes.
Okay. But if we don't raise the minimum wage, that same person who would be eligible for all of these things would still be costing us, the taxpayers, for these services. And based off of some of the things that we've seen from the federal government currently, if the federal government pulled those resources back, either that person would be knocked off of those services, or we would be on the hook and have to find the money to pay for those services. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So it would seem as though the prudent thing for us to financially do as a Commonwealth is actually increase the minimum wage, because there's a benefit to us financially for our budget. But the adverse to that is that if we don't and that person stays on these services, not only is it costing the Commonwealth the resources, but if the federal government was to pull back, we could be on the hook to the tunes of billions of dollars for those services. Is that pretty accurate?
We're potentially on the hook legally, but it's also a matter of what this assembly would decide to do.
Gotcha.
Would we decide to make it up?
I think we've made the case for why the minimum wage should be increased in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and for all of your staff for being here and answering all of our questions. And with that, this ends our budget hearing with the Department of Revenue. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., we will be back here, and we will be talking to the Department of Transportation. We'll see everybody tomorrow here at 10 a.m. for the Department of Transportation. And with that, this hearing is now concluded.